Hello friends, welcome to the M.A.R.E podcast. Before we get started, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Don't forget that you can find more about the M.A.R.E project at www.marehamburg.com, and you can support the project and this podcast through Patreon. All the links are in the description. Enjoy! Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the M.A.R.E podcast. I am beyond excited once again to welcome Kaylie on the podcast. Hi Kaylie, welcome.
Yo, good to be here.
Kaylie, oh yeah, of course. Kaylie is live from California right now, joining us all the way from the US because that's how much people love this podcast. They want to be in it no matter where they are.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, right? So how long would you be staying in? Are you moved to California and you will stay there, or are you coming back to Europe?
I'm only here because Constantine is doing an internship at Berkeley for a couple months, but we leave back to Oxford in like 2 weeks.
Okay, so you'll be back in Oxford soon.
Right. Yeah, that's
interesting. So as a disclaimer, me and Kaylie met when we were doing our master's degree in Oxford. And before that, Kaylie did a bachelor's in UC Berkeley.
Yeah.
And in, what was the degree title? It was anthropology?
In anthropology, yeah.
In anthropology. And then she came to Oxford to do a master's in archaeology, specifically maritime archaeology. So let's talk a bit about that. How did you end up in maritime archaeology?
Yeah, I think coming out of anthropology, I really wanted to pursue archaeology. And I think I would have pursued archaeology as an undergrad in the United States. But within the United States, it is more so difficult to do archaeology as an undergrad. Normally, they want you to go through the humanities or the social sciences first, so something like anthropology or classics. I think it's mostly the older schools that allow you to do archaeology as an undergrad. But I really like anthropology, and I think, honestly, anthropology is critical if you do want to go into archaeology, because they're two sides of the same coin, I think. But going out of anthropology, I really wanted to pursue archaeology. I was trying to figure out what kind of archaeology I wanted to do. And at that point, I still wasn't quite sure because a lot of things interested me. But I think what drew me to maritime archaeology was, I think I'm just more so really fascinated by cultures and people that diverge from mainstream patterns. And I think maritime archaeology, even though it focuses on, the water and being near bodies of water, it also encompasses pretty much that. A lot of peoples and practices that you wouldn't typically expect when you hear maritime archaeology.
That's super interesting. So, do you remember, is there something like a specific event or something you read that led you into this idea of what is maritime archaeology, or was it like something that came to you along the way?
I think it was something that came to me along the way. I've always liked water. I was in swim during high school, so I think that was really easy to, connect my liking to. And then I think the first couple weeks at Oxford also reinforced this thought. And
so what was different? You left the US from an anthropology background, came to the UK to pursue an archaeology degree, especially maritime archaeology. You talked about the first weeks being critical. So what was the difference? What was that critical thing that changed?
The difference between anthropology and archaeology, or the difference between...
I mean, you can tell me both. Between anthropology and archaeology and the US and UK system, maybe.
Okay, US and UK system, that's a lot more easy, I think. I honestly feel, at least at Berkeley as an undergrad in the Anthro department, I'm not sure what it's like at any other university or any other major, it felt very generic. Everything I did was very generic, and most of the readings were very wide-scoped readings that a lot of people could kind of follow along to. It didn't really feel like a super deep dive into anything specific for any of my courses, because of course, as an undergrad, you all have to take the same courses to graduate with the degree. And so starting the master's at Oxford felt very different, because all of a sudden it was very intense, specific research you're doing that Damien is assigning us to read. And that was really cool, because it finally felt like I was becoming knowledgeable about a specific area that, felt really important to me.
Oh yeah, very knowledgeable in rapid speed, I would
Oh
say.
yeah.
Uh, so do you remember any specific topic that interests you more than others? Any specific week that you enjoyed
Yeah.
more?
I think, let me think. I think it was honestly like the second or third week that we focused on maritime culture and how a lot of maritime practices and taboos and um, slang become different, like while at sea versus like while on land. And I think the whole the whole practices, all the practices surrounding death, kind of, and
Yeah.
misfortune while at sea are really interesting. Um,
Ooh,
yeah.
an interesting to a niche topic. That, but I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. So
Hmm.
we did a whole year, a very intense year, and by the end we have to do a thesis.
Right, right, right.
And I think you wrote a very interesting
I
thesis.
wrote a very
It's some,
interesting thesis.
of course, something that's not really talked about or discussed in
Exactly, I
archaeology
agree. It was
almost
very hard
at
to
all.
research for.
But that's good research. If it's hard to research for it, that means it's good research. So, do you want to give us like a summary of what you wrote about in your thesis?
Yes. So before we had to submit our thesis proposal, we had a really cool meeting with Gregor Larson. I don't know if you remember that. He was a professor in the bioarchaeology, and he gave us a really cool, like 30-minute presentation on how we should come up with a topic for our theses. And I
Oh
thought,
yeah,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Jack Russell picture.
Yeah,
It's so
exactly, exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I thought he did a
So out of
phenomenal.
context. Some
Yeah.
people say the picture with the dog, whatever that.
The picture with the dog. Yeah, he pretty much came in, and he's a professor, like I said, in the bioarchaeology side at Oxford, and he just pulled up a picture of a really cute Jack Russell puppy, and he was like, throw me questions about this dog, and people are like, what's his name? Like what kind of breed is he? How big is he? And he was like, these are all really good questions. And he was like, this is how I want you to come up with a thesis proposal. He's like, you should think of a topic that you really like and then come up with questions you want to answer about the topic. And obviously that sounds super simple, I think, but I don't know how, but he made it doesn't feel that simple when you're trying to come up with a topic. And he
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like, and I was like, oh my God, he's totally right. And at the time, my best friend throughout pretty much all my childhood, his name was Bruno. He's my Chihuahua. And I had to leave him when I came to Oxford. So I was very sad. And him
Oh,
pulling up the picture made me think of Bruno. And I was like, what is something I could do as a stupid? but
no,
combines
no, no.
that combines to Bruno's maritime archaeology. And then I had a meeting with Damien and I spoke about this and I said, I kind of want to do something with like animals and maritime archaeology because I don't think that's something that is super written about. You can find a couple of works, and I found a couple of really, really good works. Um, but he was like, yeah, you're totally right. And then as we were discussing, he brought up the topic, I think, of a couple of pigeons that were awarded during like World War II for their efforts in flying like messages. And I was like, that is super legit. And then I went on the like Wikipedia page of animals that had been awarded during like World War One, World War Two. You can find lists. And then in that list, there are a couple of pigeons. There's a couple of cats. I think like one or two cats. But most of the list are actually dogs. And I decided that's what I was going to go with. And at the beginning, the paper was going to be more about dogs in military settings in World War One, World War Two. But then I realized I really wanted to expand that because, yeah, it just was so much more information that the paper would have been, it benefited from being expanded. It's not just like dogs in military set or not dogs in the military, but dogs in and around the military as well. So yes, my
Very
paper is about dogs in and around the military setting of World War One, World War Two.
okay. So, what? Let's go back and ask. So, what are your questions? Your research
Yeah.
questions about?
Yes. So I wanted to ask, like, who are these dogs? Where did they come from? Like, what were they doing on these ships? Who brought them? Like, did they fulfill any specific purposes? How long were these dogs on these ships? Like, what happened to the dogs after the ships.
Oh my God. That's so interesting. So I know you're trying to publish your paper right
Yes, I
now,
am. It's
right?
very
So I can understand that you you can't share everything about what you're writing, but could you maybe give us an example, like one example or one case of such how did where you answer all those questions, like how does a dog end up in a military vessel and what does a dog do there?
no.
And
I would love to
how
share
often?
everything.
Oh my
It's fine.
I usually start this before I start recording. I tell people like, I understand if you can't share everything. People are like, yeah, yeah. And they usually don't share everything. They just give a summary. But Kaylie's like here, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna share
No, it's
everything.
I love this
Go.
so much. Yeah, I think so after the pigeon finding the pigeons online, I came across this article that was really cool. It was like written by I forget what online magazine, but it was about this dog named Ike, and he is on the USS Wasp, which is a current U.S. military, sorry, a current U.S. Navy vessel, and I don't know, it's somewhere I think in coasting around Asia right now. But it is about how Ike is the newest member of the USS Wasp. And I think as of 2000, I want to say 18. It might be a little bit later though, maybe even 2020. Like as of around that time, the U.S. has finally started to employ like service dogs, like emotional support dogs, on its Navy vessels, on a couple of them. And so I think the USS Wasp was the second Navy vessel that has its own emotional support dog. I think the very first dog, her name is it's like Lucy or something, but they're both Labradors. Also,
Mhm.
don't quote me on Lucy. That might not be her name. Um,
Okay.
but they're both Labradors, and they both function as emotional support dogs on these really really large cruisers. And I think that's such a fantastic thing. I think the I think once I read that article, I thought, okay, it's really cool that emotional support dogs are finally being employed because these people are so far away from home and it's so hard to be gone from that long, not only away from home, but away from society as a whole. You're on these things for months to years sometimes. Uh, and I started to think, okay, if this dog was there, they must have a reason. Or like, why a dog and like, why on a boat? And so there must have been a reason, I thought. And so when you look back throughout history of dogs on boats, you see a lot of secondhand accounts of people saying, yeah, dogs have always been on boats since long, 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 long time ago. Since, long, 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 long time, dogs have
Mhm.
been on boats. People have been bringing them. They have served this and this and this function, whether for recreational or functional purposes. And it seems like it's a very large, um, like stigma, like that this is a thing, but
Yeah.
it's really hard to find any actual evidence. But if you like open up the like Portuguese water dog handbook, the very first page would be like, yeah, Portuguese water dogs have been around since so and so year, helping fishermen like tow back in their nets or helping fishermen, catch fish or swimming between boats to pass along messages between fishermen. And these are all really amazing, cool things we don't really think about dogs doing, or dogs having the capacity to do, or people even wanting to train dogs to do. And so it must have some historical like accuracy. If so many people around the internet, around the world are claiming these things, it's just really hard to find evidence for obvious reasons. And so when I was trying to do research for dogs before Ike on boats, I came across a couple when like you Google dogs in the Navy, World War I, World War II, you start seeing a lot of really adorable photos pop up of crews in World War I, World War II, mostly like Western
Yeah.
crews. Um, smiling in these like big photos of all of the members, and then there's a cute little dog in the middle that they're all sitting around, and it's really cute. And but you see hundreds and hundreds of these photos. You go to any type of museum that has any type of online like catalog of photos, and you type in like World War I, World War II, you type in Navy, and tons of these photos will pop up. And there's like literally thousands and thousands of crews that had dogs during this time.
Okay, so it seems like there were dogs everywhere,
Yeah,
like so much that nobody cared to write something about them.
exactly.
But the good thing is that pictures exist,
Yeah,
and that proves that they actually are there.
right.
So when you started this research, did you have anything in mind based, like, for example, did you think what the functionality of dogs on boats were? Did you have like a
Yeah.
set
So
of answers in your head before you
yeah,
answered it?
initially I wanted to talk about dogs in war, like I said, like dogs of war, and how dogs were like actual members of the like fighting force, and how they like participated like not just as dogs, but they participated as active like agents of warfare,
Oh, that's
that
super
humans
interesting.
brought with them. But like I said, I wanted to expand that,
Yeah.
and I realized that well, that topic is really cool, and I might research more into that later. I became really interested in dogs being more so agents of like social facilitation, and agents of like comfort, kind of away from home, which led me to dog mascots on World War I, World War II Navy boats. So not dogs that are dogs of war, not the dogs that we see being trained to like, hunt down people, the dogs whose only purpose was to just be around and hang out and, get pets.
Nice. Oh, that's so cute. So it might have been a situation where on the same boat there will be a number of dogs who were there, the trained war dogs, and then there will be like this 1, 2 puppies who will be there
Right.
just for fun.
Yeah.
For use.
Yeah. Actually, you're probably totally right. And I think there's one book. It's about the USS Arizona. It was written by Paul Stillwell. P. Stillwell, at least. I feel like it's Paul, but it's P. Stillwell. And in that book, he discusses the history of the U.S. Navy vessel, the USS Arizona. And within that book, he describes an instance of where he they bring a puppy on board the boat, and they have to like smuggle it illegally because their captain didn't want them to have a dog on the boat, obviously. But there's an instance where they have to move a cargo of military dogs, dogs that are being shipped. I forget where, but that
Yeah.
happens.
Okay. Oh wow, that's super interesting. So we established that dogs were a thing on boats. So
Yes.
before I go more into like talking about dogs, because I think it's super interesting, I need to ask: were there any other animals, or were
Yeah.
they just dogs?
Tons of different animals. There's a really good article by Menpa we spoke about before this article,
Oh yeah,
before the Zoom,
before the recording. Yeah, yeah,
before the
we
recording.
spoke about it.
Before the
Yeah,
recording.
yeah.
And Menpa introduces a bunch of different animals. So not only while dogs were one of the primary animals brought on board, you'll also see tons of cats during World War I, World War II. Cats were also super around. They seemed while they seemed to have very much of the same characteristics of dogs. They were kind of just there to get pets and to hang out and to chill around. They also they have a slightly different vibe. I think the
Yeah.
cats did. It's a little bit different. But then also you see a bunch of wild animals. Sometimes people had goats randomly. There is like one crew that was super famous for having a cub bear on board for a while. Um, I think a bunch of parrots. I think one crew had a monkey too, and I think this is mostly because of the like international travel that's happening during this period. I'm honestly not sure how you end up with a cub or like a monkey. But yeah, people they had goats, monkeys, pigs, bunch of different animals that were really
Interesting. I mean,
important to these crews.
I can see how a goat on board would be useful. I mean,
And
goats
they were
could
not to eat.
No,
Oh, to
it
milk.
could they I wasn't specifically mentioning food, but yeah, sure. I mean, I can see how they could have a chicken on board, laying
Mhm,
eggs.
mhm.
So that would be
Yeah, some
super
places had chickens too,
useful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Even though that sounds like a terrible idea to sleep next to or
Yeah,
close to, I imagine they make a lot of noise. But at the same time, like they have fresh eggs every day, so
yeah.
that's good.
I imagine
Anyway,
that would probably be nice to hear, though. I think after a while being so far away from home, like, nature
maybe,
things that
maybe,
that isn't just the ocean, you know?
yeah, yeah. Oh my, yeah,
But
maybe.
who
I mean,
knows?
you're making a very good point. Like even some noises that we may find annoying in like land societies
Right,
on
right,
on a boat might be super nice because oh my god, we can hear how I don't know
right. The
land
world.
sounds.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's super interesting. So let's go back to you mentioned that most of the pictures and most of the cases that we see are a Western phenomenon.
yeah,
But I imagine that the feelings of like longing and staying on board a ship for a while, months, years, weeks, that must be shared throughout the world. I
yeah.
imagine.
I think
So
obviously
why do you think this is a Western phenomenon? Is it because we don't have evidence for like Eastern cases,
yeah.
or is it something else? It's
I
just
think
not enough evidence.
I think most museums are very obviously Eurocentric, Western centric, and so most of the examples we do have come from other Western countries that have either provided these photos to us or that we're just more heavily interested in the history of. And so while I do have, like in the article I wrote, there are examples of um, like Eastern countries and their like companions. Uh, those are mostly just like Eastern regiments within the Western world. So there was a couple of U.S. Navy vessels that were just composed um, of like Chinese Americans or like Filipino Americans. Um, and so, yeah, I think this is mostly just a bias in history,
Yeah,
obviously.
that's okay, very nice. So you also mentioned the animals, dogs especially, being found in like fishermen boats,
Yeah,
helping with fishermen. So
right.
is there kind of like an ethnographic parallel to that somewhere in the world?
Yes.
Is it still
The,
happening?
yes, yes, yes. Okay, so this is definitely research I want to continue. There is a really, really good paper. The author's name is her last name is Lugli, and she published a paper I think in 2018. Let me look up the title. Her first name is Francesca, and she no actually 2023. Wow, super recent. Just kidding. So the article is called "Wolves, Dogs, and Water: Dogs and Fishing Boats," and she published it in a book called Dogs Past and Present, which was a conference I think that happened in 2018, and they finally composed the book in 2023. And I've been in contact with her because she is one of the only archaeologists slash anthropologists who studies dogs in maritime environments. So I instantly wanted to reach out to her because she was one of the only firsthand accounts I could come up with. But yes, in that paper, she talks about the extensive history of dogs as right now companions and in the past, like functional workers in Italian and Portuguese fishermen ports. And so yeah, she just did a study like in 2000. It was published in 2018, so she probably did it a couple years before then, I imagine. Yeah, and she surveyed Italian and Portuguese fishermen, and most of them said that while owning or while bringing dogs on board boats is illegal due to the like biohazard, because
Oh,
they are actively catching fish to sell in markets. While they
yeah.
know it is illegal, it's kind of loosely enforced, or it's so loosely enforced enough, at least, that most people are able to get away with still bringing their dogs with them to fish. And while most of them now just say they do it because they love their dogs and they just like having them out with them, they do say that they know that it's always been done. Like their ancestors did it, and it's a continued tradition that they like to, yeah, like to practice and continue.
Wow, that is super interesting. So, do you see your research developing your research further? Are you thinking about PhD positions or research
Y-
positions, something like that, or is it
Yeah,
something you want to do in your free time?
yeah. So I just applied to Oxford for a PhD in,
Ooh, good
but I
luck with that.
thank you. Oh, thank you. I applied though in the bioarchaeology side for Gregor. I applied with Gregor Larson actually, in a totally separate idea that I would talk about again if you wanted another episode with me.
I
But
mean,
no,
give us a tease, and we can do another episode. Yeah,
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
be down for
Okay,
that.
okay. Entirely different subject. I there are these native dogs that belong to Patagonia. So that's Chile and Argentina. And when the Spanish came in the 1600s, they took note of this dog that the Native Americans of Patagonia had trained to help them fish. And so they would throw the dogs off their canoes into the water, and the dogs would herd fish into their nets. And they would also hunt otters. So they dropped the dogs off the boats and they would hunt down otter for them. And that is very interesting. It's one of the only
Wow,
instances that we have like evidence for dogs actively like doing things in water, you know? And so
wild.
that's what I applied for Geiger Larson because unfortunately these dogs are no longer around. They've been eradicated, I think, as of like the early 1900s. Um,
Mm.
but very interesting.
So, what
But
do you plan on doing? You plan on like finding like I don't know
yes, so
fibers of their body and studying them?
uh, we have a couple of specimens in two or three museums. I think there's two in like Chile, Argentina, and there's one skull at the Natural History Museum of Paris. And so the issue that I would like to talk about is currently there's two dogs. We thought there was just one dog. It was just called the Patagonian dog. But now we know it's at least two different dogs. And so well, only one of those dogs is responsible for the fishing. And so I want to dive more into the genetics to determine what dog is what dog and
Wow.
the ancestors of the dog. Because the next issue is that one dog is supposed to come from the Lycolopics, which is a type of fox in South America. It's not really a fox because it's more so related to wolves, but it is divergent evolution where it looks like a fox and culturally it functions as a fox. Um, and so it's just this whole really interesting mix of things that are kind of confusing that we don't really know what is what or why people did what. So it's really cool.
Wow, that sounds superbly interesting. I hope you managed to do that.
Yeah, me
That
too.
sounds it would be lovely to have you back in Oxford soon, I imagine in October. Does it start in October?
October.
All right. Yeah. So you chose to go into basically now that you applied, you chose to go into research of I would say maritime stuff.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
maritime
I
oriented
definitely.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why choose that path for you? Because it's a big decision, right?
Yeah.
Going into a PhD.
I think the hardest part of doing a master's and doing a PhD is deciding what you're interested in and what you want to do. And it's entirely the hardest part. I don't think the research is that hard. It is just deciding like what you want your niche to be. And that was always really hard for me, even throughout my undergrad, thinking about I always knew I wanted to continue doing research. I just didn't know in what. And I think when I started writing my master's dissertation on dogs as companions in World War I, World War II, that really influenced me and my understanding that I can really just make archaeology whatever. Like archaeology is so many facets. It's so multidisciplinary. It's like everything that humans do and humans touch and humans say. It's just human culture. And so that's when I really understood that I can really just do whatever I want. I don't have to be forced to like do Egypt or do Greece or do Rome. not that that's bad. There's so many cool things, but I think doing this paper, I really liked the like anthropological take of dogs and humans and how humans choose to anthropomorphize certain animals and how we choose to interact with animals and why we even choose to interact with animals. And I think that's
Oh
very
yeah.
interesting.
Oh yeah, and not only animals, but I think humans have anthropocized even the boats
Yeah,
themselves,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
So we see kind of the like this pattern of people wanting to like feel part of a community and get thinking that everyone is a human around them. So
Exactly.
I think it's very interesting. And so where do you see yourself in like 10 years, let's say, 15 years after that? Do you still want to
All
like
right.
pursue this career and like research far into the future?
Yeah.
Or would you like want to settle down someday and just do something else?
I think so. If I do the, let's say, okay, 10 years, let's say I get into the PhD, that's like 3 to 4 years, right? I
Yeah.
imagine after that, I would probably do something like oh God, what is those titles called when you continue research? I
Post.
can't. A postdoc. There we go. I
Yeah.
imagine I'd probably do a postdoc for a couple
All
of
right.
years until I could find like active, actual employment somewhere.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
the professor, Francesca Lugli, that I mentioned, who wrote that article on Italian and Portuguese fishermen and their connection to their dogs, she right now she runs a conference and she is like the head of the Italian ethno-archaeology department. And I think that's really cool what she does. And so I don't know, maybe I'll I'll continue to try to get a job from her. And so if I could get a job in this, I think that would be amazing. That sounds really fun. But if not,
Oh yeah.
I understand I understand the difficulties of getting a job in
Oh yeah,
archaeology.
but my thought is that it's not about archaeology. It's about like in archaeology we like labels a lot,
Right.
right? So we do everything with labels. So you're either that kind of archaeologist or this kind of
Right,
archaeologist.
right, right.
So it's just that I was thinking about where
Mm,
does dog
yeah,
special dog, water
yeah,
dog specialist fit in this
yeah,
landscape, like this
yeah,
system of archaeology. But you very have a very good idea of like it going into the ethnography
yes,
part of things and just specialize in that. I think it's very valid. I think
yeah.
there's lots and lots and lots of good ethnographic like departments in the world where you can work. But that means, of course, that you will need to move for work a lot. You may not be able to stay in your hometown. Does it bother you, or are you okay with the idea of moving around?
Eh, this is such a big conversation that I'm not really sure at the moment. I
Oh yeah, that's okay. No, it's
yeah,
very
yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I don't mind moving around, obviously for work, but I think being 2 months in one place versus and getting to go back home afterwards versus having to go from year to year to year to year to a different place, that might be a different story.
Oh yeah,
Um, so yeah, it just depends.
it just depends. But you seem really relaxed and ready to like take on whatever life brings your way. So that's interesting. That's very good for you. I'm happy. I hope everything works out the way you want to.
Thank you.
Um, so so let's talk a bit more about dogs then, because I think I
Yes.
have a lot of things to ask and I didn't ask because I don't want to like spend
No, I have
15
so
minutes
many
talking
things
about.
to say I haven't even said yet. I'm very upset.
Okay, wait. So what would you like to say? What do you like people to
Oh,
know about dogs?
oh, I would like
Take
them
the
to
lead.
know so much stuff. Okay, okay. Actually, I okay, I'm gonna start talking and I'm just gonna continue talking. You stop me when like time is done or when I've said too
I will
much
never stop you.
because
Go.
I know we're close on time already. Okay, okay, okay.
Oh, that's all right. Don't worry about time. I'm gonna cut it into 3 episodes if you go for 3 hours.
Honestly, I
Go
could.
crazy.
Okay, okay, okay. So dogs on boats, right? How do they get there? Where do they come from? Whoa. Uh, so when
Isn't that like a reference, like BoJack Horseman or something?
is it?
I feel like the tone of your voice reminded me of something.
No, I definitely wasn't
Anyway,
referencing anything. I
go
was
back.
just so
Okay, okay.
excited. Uh, also, okay. So when it is difficult to research the history of these companion dogs because, like you said, there's so much like forgotten history about them. People just didn't have time to write this down. They didn't think, I don't think that they didn't think it was important, but it was so commonplace during this period. I think that people just, they never realized that in this current time, we wouldn't have as great as an understanding as it was in the past. So there are no like, there's not a lot of firsthand accounts of these dogs, and there aren't, as I know of at the moment, there aren't any academic articles about these dogs. There's a lot of books, a lot of really, really informative books about different companion dogs, but those are more so just like little tiny biographies of each dog and like their cute little accomplishments. Entirely adorable, but not very informative as a whole to this practice. And so most of my information was peeled from these little mini biography books and then peeled from where they got their information, which is normally uh, like biographies or published journals from members of these crews, or like secondhand, third-hand accounts from their family members who were like, oh yeah, Uncle Jack used to tell me about this time when he was the best friend of Jack on board of the USS Amazing or something. And the other place I got most information was from like actually like Facebook posts from different navies. So like, yeah, the USS Institute, like blah blah blah, and they once in a while they'll post really amazing photos of like a dog and crew members, and they'll say something like, yeah, this was Jack and Peter. They were best friends. They did this and this and this. Or they'll publish like, hey, this is the collar of M.A.R.E aboard, yeah, the USS Cool, and it'll say, yeah, USS Cool M.A.R.E. And they'll say, served from 1917 to 1922. And they're really, really cool things that you have to piece together the histories of. So as I was looking at this information, I discovered that just like humans kind of were drafted through multiple methods into the Navy, it's kind of how they got their dogs as well. A lot of dogs were gifted to Navy. So if your brother Jack was joining the Navy, his sister Sarah might give him a dog and be like, take him with you. We don't want him. And so they would take them with them. Other dogs were rescued from either ports or operations. There are a lot of dogs that were taken from like German U-boats after they sunk. And so the puppies had been on the German U-boats, like, being companions there, but then they sunk them. And so they took the dog with them, kind of both as a trophy, and they were also
What,
rescuing these dogs.
was it a hostage? Was it like a
Yeah,
rescuing mission?
no, totally not hostage. They became members immediately of their new boat.
Oh my god! I imagine the admirals like, yes, Admiral, we captured 3 German officers and
Yes,
a dog.
and a dog. Oh, and then some dogs were also like stolen onto the boats, like illegally. There's a lot of dogs that were just taken, and they weren't supposed to be taken. And you get a bunch of funny like people saying, if we get far enough out to sea without the captain noticing this dog, at some point it'll become too much of a nuisance to turn the boat around and drop the dog back off, that the captain will have to say, he can stay. And so you get a bunch of people doing that as well, trying to hide these dogs until they're far enough away from port. So yeah, that's how they get on the boats. And the dogs also weren't just on boats. Obviously, navies have bases on land throughout the world in different places.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you see also a lot of dogs being the like on base dogs for the Navy. And so they never go out to sea. They are just the general Navy dog that is on land. And so if you look up Just Nuisance, he was the Navy dog for the Royal Navy in South Africa. And he's very, very famous. He never went out to sea, but he was a Navy dog all the way. And, people would come visit him when they got back from the ports, and he was always just there. Let's see.
And he was a very good boy, I
He was
imagine.
incredibly very good boy. Let's see. You also see once the dogs are on the boats that there is just like people, there's also a method, there's also like a form of hierarchy among these dogs. Some dogs like had to be hid the whole time. Some captains like, just didn't like the dogs. So the dogs were forced to be, hid and they couldn't live their full doggy lives. Other dogs other dogs were like captains' pets that the captains themselves would bring onto boat. Like this was their dog that their wives were like, we don't want you to have this dog at home anymore. Please bring him with you. And so yeah, they did. And so these dogs, like Bams is from the Norwegian vessel. I don't know how to pronounce it in
No,
English
okay.
spelling. It looks like the Thorad or the Torad.
Okay.
Maybe it's said somehow differently. But yeah, he's from a Norwegian vessel. But apparently he got the like VIP access to everything. He had his own like dog food that the Navy would ship in for him. He got like these like beautiful wicker baskets that were his beds, and like he had his own bedroom in the boat. In the bedroom, I think was just like a closet they had converted to like his bedroom. Um,
That's so cute though.
it's
He,
very
he had
cute.
he had a bedroom.
He had a bedroom. And so it's very interesting to see these, what's the word? The treatment of these dogs. And you also see the dogs also are being given like uniforms as well. And so these dogs get either they get really cool collars that are really,
Aw.
like they're made of like leather. And then they have these like metal inscriptions on them that say the dog's name and the dog's vessel. And it's really cool to see that they had like so much pride in these dogs, and these dogs were like actual members of these boats that that they had. They even bothered to inscribe these things onto their collars. You also get little miniature dog uniforms sometimes, so they get their own little like USS amazing,
Something. Yeah.
yeah, like uniforms and stuff, and they start getting their own like ribbons and awards too. They have their own little like world in which they are full members of these communities.
Wow.
And it's also really interesting because I think while some dogs were big enough to fit into like human navy clothing, they could just kind of like put on top of them. For like the little eeny little mini doggies, obviously they couldn't order like a size extra small dog in navy military. Uh, and so for these dogs, it's obvious that these were handmade. Uh,
Yeah.
and being away from ports and being away from society, it's it kind of paints the opposite picture, I think, of what we think of as maritime communities in the past as being like toxic masculine places where no one knows how to perform any type of like feminine actions like sewing and anything creative like that. So it's really interesting to see it's not always like that. Like the men there, like they sewed these
Yeah.
cute dogs, they're cute tiny little uniforms,
Oh my
and
god.
it's very heartwarming to see.
Oh yeah. First of all, that's like dressing up your dog before it was cool.
Yeah,
Everyone
exactly.
does it. But that was before it was cool. And you imagine those, hardcore sailors,
Right.
tattooed
Yeah,
from head to
exactly.
toe.
Exactly.
Like I killed so many people in my life, and you see them like sewing this tiny costume for their
It's
dog. It's
yeah,
adorable.
it is very there's a photo, I forget which museum has, that is a sailor, and he's a really young kid. He looks like he's 20, and he's holding in his hands like a tiny little dog who has a little really cute life jacket, and the life jacket is tiny, and it's the same life jacket that the man is wearing. And obviously he must have sewed this dog this tiny cute life jacket. But there's also an accompanying video. It's really interesting because you don't really see a lot of videos. You see photos, you
Mm.
don't really see a lot of videos of World War One, World War Two individuals on Navy boats. But there's an accompanying video of him fastening the life jacket onto this dog. And he's very sweet and tender, and it's very slow and very cautious. And it's such
Oh my
a cute
God.
thing to watch.
And we're talking about an age like way before all the digital revolution,
Right,
right?
right,
So
exactly.
taking the time to film something like that, it wasn't something like they pulled up their iPhone and filmed.
Right, exactly.
They had
This
to
was
set up the
important.
whole thing. That was an important event that they needed to like remember and not
Yes,
forget. So they like filmed it, which is
exactly.
wonderful. It's wonderful.
I agree. And after the dogs have their military outfits on, you also start to see that some dogs were not quite satisfied with their positions of like just companions. There are also some dogs who seem to want to fulfill their positions as crew members, and they seem to take it upon themselves to also perform actions relating to crew members. So there's dogs like Bams, like I mentioned earlier from the Thorod, and dogs like Nuisance from South Africa, who were known actively by the wider community to go out on like patrol missions with their companions. And so obviously when you're on a boat, it's not just being on a boat. Usually when you're in the Navy, you have to do a lot of patrol work once you're landed at port. And so yeah, these dogs were known for tagging along and for
Wow.
roughing up anyone who was doing anything bad. And there's so many really interesting in depth stories about these dogs that make you think that they are definitely like enhanced, or what's the
Yeah.
word, people are projecting their emotions or thoughts onto these dogs, but they're so corroborated by so many different individuals that it really questions like, what we think of as like agency, and what we think of dogs as capable of doing and capable of thinking. um there are a couple of different stories of BAMs during the night watch when you have to watch the boat alone at nighttime. A lot of people would say, they got tired, they wanted to go get coffee. Of course, they weren't allowed to do that though, because they had to watch the boat to make sure no one was doing anything bad. And so they would leave Bams to watch the boat by himself, and they would sneak off to the canteen to go get some coffee while Bam stood and watched guard. And they said there's a lot of stories of hearing Bam start barking all of a sudden, and they come out running from the canteen, and Bams is preventing like the head captain from entering the boat because that was his job. He wasn't allowed to have anyone enter the boat. And there's a lot of
Wow.
stories of Nuisance having, of course, sailors like to get drunk, obviously. And there's a lot of stories of Nuisance escorting really drunk sailors home, and not even like walking home. A lot of times the sailors would take the like train out to faraway places. And Nuisance would accompany them, and he'd get them on the train apparently, and he'd get them off the correct stop, and he'd make sure they'd have all of their military gear they were supposed to have with them. And it's really interesting what people say about these dogs and how
Wow.
they feel that they affected them. And
Even though that does sound a bit far fetched, but at the same time, if like many people say it, I mean,
right.
who are we to like doubt it?
Yeah,
But
exactly. I
it's
think.
so and I mean, I imagine that a dog must have been a way better guard that any human would have
Yeah,
been.
totally. Yeah,
I
there's
mean, they can see better, hear
mhm.
better, smell better. Not see, but like hear and smell, and even sense
Yeah,
things
there's a
better
couple of
than
stories
any human.
of those dogs saving people's lives. I think there's one instance where there was a knife attack, and this man came out of nowhere and began to attack one of Bams's companions, one of his Navy comrades, and Bams managed to push the man into the ocean. I think so.
Wow.
His companion remained unharmed, and yeah, Bams was the only one who saw that and had time to respond. And there was another time where someone fell off the boat, and Bams jumped in, and he pulled him back up. It was very cool. And I think there's a similar story where one man got mugged and was really badly injured after a night out. And Nuisance went to the scene and he managed to find him, and he pulled over a taxi driver to have the taxi driver come call the proper
Wow.
authorities. So very, very cool stories of these dogs.
So dogs on boats are not only like emotional support dogs, but they're also super useful
Yeah.
in so many cases. So
Yeah.
it would be like the way you explain it, it's almost like a no-brainer that a dog wouldn't be on a boat. Like, why
Right.
wouldn't you have a dog on the boat?
Right. Why wouldn't
It,
you?
yeah, it's like everything it does is good, and there's
Mm-hmm.
no reason why not to have a dog on the boat. So that even makes me think about the captains who didn't want dogs on the boat. Were they just bad captains? Were like, no, I
No,
want you all to suffer.
I think at this point it was just illegal. During this time, it was illegal to have animals that were like unsanctioned onto these boats, and everyone knew that.
Uh,
But it was a general, also just not enforced kind of law, and
yeah,
so
I was under the impression that there was this narrative that the sailors would not take animals on board because it was bad luck. Was it
yeah,
that something of the age of sail that changed during the
yeah.
World Wars?
I think during the World Wars, this narrative definitely went away because you see tons of animals. Even before World Wars, when you think of like the 19th century, and then even sometimes during the 18th century, you see journal entries of captains having their dogs with them. And it's just their dog that was treated like royalty on board these Navy vessels. So I definitely think
Okay.
there was a shift
Okay,
after.
but we can see dogs before the World Wars as
Yes,
well.
yes,
Oh, okay. That's superbly interesting, and it's nice how you. I think it shows to anyone who is looking to do a research degree in archaeology how if you are interested in one thing, you can create this whole world of research and narratives and discussions around that topic. Because as you said, archaeology is about the humans, right?
yeah,
So anything, most of the things we care about, someone in the past cared about as well.
yeah.
So
Especially
yeah.
contemporary archaeology. It's so multifaceted. Like I for this article, talking about archaeology was difficult because obviously we can't see like dog footsteps on vessels. It's hard to find archaeological evidence of these dogs. But what makes this article possible, yeah, is all the photographs and all the journal entries and all the tombstones of these dogs as well that were commissioned after they died, that are
Oh
very,
wow.
very reminiscent of uh, maritime tombstones as a whole for humans. They definitely hold parallels.
All right. Do you remember some examples of what they say, or it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the
So
iconography on them?
there's an article called Gravestones and Monuments in the Maritime Cultural Landscape by Stewart in 2007. And he writes in that article about the collective theme of maritime tombstones and how they reinforce that the sea is a kind of scary, unknown place and reinforce the collective like memory of these individuals who have died at sea and who will no longer have access to. And they bring together communities of people who all share similar stories of having family members who died at sea. Uh, and all of them are very descriptive. If they don't have quotes or if they don't have any kind of biblical sentences, they will have either or and corresponding images of powerful vessels sailing in really turbulent waters or something that shows to the audience just the scariness of sailing at sea and how dangerous it is. And when you look at these tombstones that were created for some of these dogs, it's really powerful. It's not only were these dogs, yeah, like given clothes and given titles of, whatever their titles were, lieutenant commander or so and so. People bothered to make them tombstones. Like, let me find one. There is a tombstone of a dog called Bruce from the HMS Formidable, and he actually has a really kind of sad story. And it was, let's see, it was so the HMS Formidable, it sunk in the English Channel, and apparently the Captain Loxley and Bruce were last seen escorting people off the ship and making sure as many people could escape. And apparently Captain Loxley was just smoking his cigarette calmly, giving out instructions. And Bruce was there with them the whole time. And at the end of the day, Bruce and Loxley were discovered dead. And the survivors of the boat commissioned a tombstone for Bruce. And the tombstone now lies on the English Channel beach. And it says, Bruce, he's a terrier, says, who stood till the end with Captain Loxley on the bridge of the HMS Formidable when sunk by a torpedo 30 miles from... let's see. The writing gets kind of bad. Anyways, sunk by a torpedo, and it continues for a little bit longer, and the grass has kind of grown up around it, so it's a little bit more hard to see. It's a really pretty tombstone, and it says a lot of information that parallels the information on human tombstones in maritime environments. And you see a couple of these tombstones like this. He's not the only one.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's such a touching story.
It is very touching.
Like I said, an innocent creature just sitting there sinking with the ship.
Yeah,
because that's the home it knows. That
right.
It's the dog is part of it. So of course he stood by the captain. Where would he go? But on that touching, amazing story, I would like to wrap up this conversation.
Yes.
I think we could definitely do more. We can definitely talk more about it. Let's do it in the future.
Yeah.
But for now, do you have any closing remarks?
Yes. Okay. So I wouldn't say.
Oh my gosh, she was ready.
Just because there's so much I haven't said yet. Okay.
Oh my God.
Not only
part 2, and you'll talk about everything. Okay.
We can end it here, I think. So
we can end this part here.
Not only were these dogs given tombstones, a lot of them are still commemorated and remembered to this day. So dogs like Bams and Nuisance, they have yearly festivals and remembrance tours that happen. I think every year there's a Nuisance lookalike contest in South Africa where people come. It's just a hangout day, and everyone brings their Great Danes. Because right now there's a really big statue of just Nuisance, and he hangs out at the port where he always used to hang out. And it's really cool. He's standing overlooking the water, and it's a really nice statue. And I think for most people who don't know his history, it's a really interesting thing to find. It's why is this huge dog hanging out here? So there's a yearly contest every year. Bams, he died away from home. So he died in Scotland. And while they were there, over 300 people attended his funeral because he became a member of not only the ship's community, but the Scotland community as a whole. He would visit elementary schools every day. He'd go visit the butcher. He would visit everyone. Everyone loved him. And so everyone came out to see his funeral when he died. And to this day, his tombstone is still very clean and very well kept because people look after it. These tombstones and these dogs as a whole become a focal point for collective memory in communities, I think. And that's very interesting. And with Bams, at least, not only does he have a tombstone, but they also commissioned a statue of him. And it's really cool because his statue looks out to the sea facing Norway. And Norway created the same statue of Bams facing the sea, pointing towards Scotland. And so these two dog Bamses are looking at each other. And it's meant to symbolize Scotland and Norway's shared memory and feelings of BAMs, and not only BAMs, but all of their family members and friends and community members who died, during World War II.
Wow. And you can see how a dog connects two communities.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, amazing. I want to when I say I got that dog in me, I want it to be like a navy dog. I'm convinced now. Anyway, this has been great. It has been amazing, and we should definitely do more. Thank you, Kaylie, very much for being with us this beautiful, fine evening. I think it's morning for you, but it's like evening.
Yeah, it's morning.
So having a good rest of your day.
Yeah.
And we will talk again very soon.
Yeah. Please invite me back.
And I
Let's
hope
talk
to
about Patagonian dogs.
Yeah. And I hope to see you all soon when you
Yeah.
come back. All right. Thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the MARE podcast, and I'll see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.